Hello, and welcome to ADIPEC Energy Dialogues, our series of industry-driven conversations with thought leaders. I'm Gaurav Sharma. Today, we are delighted to welcome Morag Watson, who is the SVP of Digital Science and Engineering at oil and gas giant BP. Morag, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here today.
I think let's jump straight into the first question. I think it's a pressing subject we encounter a lot in public discourse these days about the industry, and that is the coming together of the molecule and bits and bytes. So if you look at this newfound symbiosis between physics, geology, and computer science as the pathway forward, what is your take on where we are?
So I think oil and gas, is historically is really an engineering and science-based company industry using physics and chemistry to describe and predict what's going on. However, that's still, well, we've got to remember that's still just a model of what's going on, and it's super complex. I think what we're seeing is that data, and the data approaches actually can augment, bring a different dimension. And it's, using things like AI to describe a situation potentially at a more granular level, so that you can actually build onto the physics and the more engineering models. And so whilst physics models are broad and generally applicable approximations, sometimes data-driven models can often predict more, but sometimes in a more confined operating space. But I think the other thing I would just like to pull out there is that applying data and AI techniques actually might allow us to do things that we haven't been able to do before. And that's where we have little to no data, and actually allow us, applying what you've seen someplace else to a new area could actually give you a new kind of insight and added benefits. So for me, it's about the marriage between the two. It's not that data techniques are overtaking the science and engineering. It's about this bringing together and the augmentation of bringing data into and data decision making into the physics and engineering side. So I see it as like I say, a perfect kind of marriage.
I think as SVP at BP and the digital leader, you have front row seat when it comes to looking for new skill set, trying to convert people around to your new viewpoint, your newfound digital Alamos, both within BP and the industry in general. So when it comes to recruiting this digital skill set, where is the industry at in general, and where is BP at in particular?
One way to look at digital is to look at it as a set of capabilities that are around data, around AI, around robotics, emerging skills. And another way to look at digital is to look at it as a mindset. So I think in terms of, in general in the industry, are there more skills become available, people graduating from university that have these particular data, robotic, AI skill sets, and do we need to encourage more of those into our industry and then leverage them? But the flip side is also true in terms of, in order to leverage those skill sets and bring them in, actually we need to adopt a different mindset and be open to doing things a little bit differently. And we've just mentioned, talking about augmenting traditional ways of doing things, which have been science and physics based, which are all totally valid and still valid, but actually being open to saying, actually, there might be something else that we can do on top. We can augment it, we can change it. And so for me, I think it's about a journey along, where's the mindset? How open are we to doing things a little bit differently? And I would say that's been a journey. And I think, in general, what I've seen, what I've observed is that the oil and gas industry in general has been maybe a little bit behind other industries like FMCG, where, digital marketing has been at the front. And so they've been very open to and have to leverage digital skills. So in industry terms, I think probably oil and gas industry has really woken up over the last 3 to 5 years, and now really gets it. I mean, the war on talent, the competition to bring in external talent is pretty high. So that's a good indication that we're definitely along the curve.
Sure, of course. And of course, if you talk about the scenario, yet at the same time, we discuss the skill set, you bring it all together, and often on the speaking circuit, I'm increasingly encountering, I suspect you are as well, that a number of industry heads say, well, we oil and gas companies are, for all intents and purposes, over the coming decades, going to be technology companies that happen to just produce hydrocarbons. Does that sort of holistic theme sort of chime into your way of thinking?
So I think, you know, what I worry about when we get into these kind of discussions is that we forget the importance of the business domain knowledge and the industry relationships. And I think we don't want to forget that. I mean, that's really important. At the end of the day, you don't have a business if you don't have the domain knowledge in the first place. I think, though, I think how we use technology, and technology being at the heart of how you do and how you apply that knowledge and how you define the future and where you go. I think it's having digital and technology at the heart of your business. And so are we becoming a technology company that happens to be doing the energy? I think that might be trying to apply a traditional mindset. I think it just is, because if I think about how you do things at home right now, you don't say, oh, actually I'm employing technology here to communicate with my family. It's just, oh, that's how I communicate with my family. And so I kind of agree with it, but on the other hand, I worry that we lose the essence of what the business is by saying it's just a technology company. Absolutely, we leverage technology, but I think it just becomes part of the energy industry overall.
I think one thing, if you take the last 2-3 discussion points as a whole, is and by no means this is any sort of way of trying to put you on the spot, but then it is a very integrated world out there, and the oil and gas industry as a whole is discovering newfound digital alamos, process efficiencies, especially in the age of COVID, where there's pressure to have lower break-evens. Now, one question here is that in the integrated chain, whether we're looking at upstream, downstream, or midstream, from where you sit, the front row seat that you have, which one of the segments is sort of ahead of the curve, if I may use the expression?
Oh, wow. That's a very interesting question. So if I think back to, when I entered the energy industry several years back, I would have said, that upstream was very, very, very far ahead in terms of digital, obviously using it in the seismic processing, and just the whole complexity of how we found hydrocarbons. I guess that's the place I started, and so it was very, very evident to me that we've been using big data. We didn't call it big data then, but we've been using big data and analytics in many shapes and forms for a long time in the upstream organization, which was certainly where my experience comes from. In terms of where we are on the digital curve now, I think it's different in different areas. So I think in terms of our downstream businesses, if you look at the customer-facing businesses, those are highly digital, online. Is there more you can do? Of course, there's more you can do. And similarly, in our upstream, in our operating our facilities, which actually is not even a unique upstream piece, because obviously we operate refining facilities as well. You would say we maybe in general the sector started a wee bit later, partially I think because of concerns about the safety of some of the technology actually in those quite complex environments. So I think it's not a simple question to answer, because I think it depends on which bit you look at, and I think even within upstream, you would say that the subsurface has been there for a long time, and maybe you haven't driven the use of technology all the way through all your decision making in the way that we'd like to going forward. So I don't see it as a competition. I see it as very much different parts of an integrated company working to inform each other. And I think there's still a lot to do in all places, but I wouldn't like to really call out who's ahead. And the other thing is, digital is not just about bringing in efficiencies. I think the other thing that specifically or particularly in our customer-facing businesses, you can see is it actually is allowing us to look at new businesses, new opportunities, bring in new offers, and so I think that's a different way of applying digital. So I think collectively across the patch there is a lot going on, and I really wouldn't like to call out one as being ahead of the other.
For sure, but I guess cross-stream technology needs backing, it needs nurturing, it needs investment. Now, whether we look at the top 20 IOCs, BP including, whether we look at NOCs, whether we look at people on the vendor side, the likes of ABB, Schneider, Honeywell, etc., we see that a number of these companies, yourselves including, have very thriving venture capital funding arms. And via these VC funding arms, we are getting data that somehow, despite all the pressures that COVID has placed on the operating climate, anecdotal and the empirical evidence somehow points to you guys still going down the pathways of backing viable technologies. Now, looking at the next 5 to 10 years in a post-COVID world where there might be requirements on a lot of us doing things differently, such as you and me talking via a webcam, and remote working and advanced robotics, remote rigs, you name it. How crucial are the VC funding arms for yourselves and your peers?
So I think certainly speaking from my observations and speaking for what I see, I see as the VCs and the startup world in general as another source of innovation and looking at things differently. And if we're going to tackle the challenges ahead of us, a changing environment, a new and different future out there, then I don't think you can necessarily do it alone. And we have certainly used, one of the uses of looking at the startups is to get that different thinking in and to see new opportunities that maybe we couldn't have seen for ourselves, or even if we could, maybe they were not directly in front and center in our current set of activities, and we actually need to partner with somebody else to see if that actually might be a viable thing or a viable technology. So I think we see this as a crucial part of our strategy going forwards, is that we want to engage the external ecosystem because we know we can't do it all ourselves, and we know that great ideas and solutions will come from many, many different places, of which venturing is one way to do that. I mean, we just announced this week an investment in Sathalytics, which is an analytics firm that does amazing things with satellite data and with remote sensing data, and this is very much recognizing that there's a unique capability that we don't have inside BPE, that could give us access to completely different things. I mean, we use them, for instance, as part of our methane journey. So I think for several years now, and restated recently, we see the venturing arm as very much front and center to helping us innovate and innovate through many of the challenges as we go forward.
Let's chalk the pathway of where some of these innovations might take us. Now, courtesy COVID or discourtesy COVID, or given the situation humankind finds itself in, and of course companies such as BP and the complex operating climate you and your colleagues find yourselves in, how big a driver would technology be? And could we, peering into your crystal ball, could we sort of in the next 5 to 10 years imagine advanced robotics, remote rigs, etc., being commonplace rather than some phantasma that is being discussed in sort of academic forums or events?
So, I mean, witness today, remote working, as I think everybody is doing across the world, is happening in a way that I don't think people thought was possible. Truly testing the bounds of what is possible, truly testing the bandwidth, as we can be a testament today. So I think I think many of the technologies that are emerging today are emerging at a faster rate. Every time I look at the trajectory around some of the more advanced technologies that have not yet reached commerciality, originally when you look at it, you go, yeah, that might be 5 to 10 years out. And then when you see the breakthroughs and you see the impetus that is put in there for there to be breakthroughs, I see the trajectory coming closer and closer and closer. So I think many of the things like employing advanced robotics, whether that be in terms of an autonomous retail, or whether that be actually using advanced robotics in some of our more complex and hazardous environments like refineries, I see that as being so much more in reach than maybe even just a year ago. But I have to go back and stress that this is not, for me, it's not just about the technology. Many of these technologies have been on a reasonably fast trajectory for a while. You've got to have the business mindset as well and have the openness to actually think about, can we do things differently? Can we, it needs to be adopted, right? And you don't, that doesn't just happen by saying, oh, well, here's 10 robots that kind of going to do your jobs for you or whatever. That it just doesn't work. And so I think the thing that's I've been most impressed with, or the thing that has most impressed me, is just the change in mindset to actually make it possible for some of these technologies to radically change how we do things. And without that, these things would still be, 10, 15, 20 years off. But I think now, and every day, I think it's just coming closer and closer to a reality.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at some of the technologies in play, especially if you look at downstream sites, your refineries, etc. I mean, I remember getting a demo in 2015, and within a matter of years, a couple of years, your drones were sort of inspecting chimney masts. Your colleagues on the ground at refineries were using AI and AR and VR headsets to do their health and safety trainings. So one question here is that if we are looking at emerging technology, and I know it's a difficult one to pin down, but is the lead time from say if I'm using expression from lab to physical deployment, is that getting reduced quite substantially these days?
In general, I would say so, but I say that with a bit of caution because it kind of depends what area you're looking at. So anything that I think is based on data and relies on data in of itself, I think is probably accelerating maybe a little bit faster than some of the more complex things like quantum computing. And I think what's happened is you've had this perfect storm, if you like, of a deployment of sensors. And partly what's happened there is you've got smaller, cheaper, more accessible sensors that are collecting more and more data. And so you've got lots more data out there. You've got phenomenal increases in compute power at ever more accessible cost. And then you've got enormous increases in the capability around software, so actually algorithmic programming. And what you've got is you've got a perfect coalescence, if you like, of those three that has meant that particularly where data is concerned, more and more capability is coming out faster and faster. I mean, just take something like computer vision. It's been a holy grail in kind of the AI space for quite some years. And just really in the last 2 or 3 years, it's gone from being 90% accurate in certain circumstances, 90% accurate to plus 95%, maybe 97% accurate. So, and that's at the point where you can start saying, oh, that's almost as good as a human. And so I think in the space where you're involving data, I do think that there is an acceleration. I think in the spaces where it's more complex and some of the more further out things, let's say the next generation computing, even things like DNA computing, some of the further out, it's still a reasonable time till those will be in play. Although having said that, I'm sure I've just talked about quantum computing, and I'm sure I'll come off this call and someone will say, hey, there's been a breakthrough. So you just have to be on top of it, right?
That is indeed the pace of change. And I think it's been a fascinating conversation. What I would like to do to round off the conversation is sort of have a two-part question for you. You know, whichever industry acronym or term you huddle around, whether it's Industrial Revolution 4.0, oil and gas 4.0, which probably is closer to home, or whether we're talking about, you know, the pathways forward. The first question comes to mind is that the often loosely branded term big data. And in terms of the discourse coming out of BP and its peers has been that it's not the big data that matters, it's what you do with it. So first thing is where is advanced data analytics taking us? And secondly, to round off what's been a very interesting discussion with you, is to, when we look at all things considered oil and gas 4.0 wise, how is this now being leveraged as a tool to attract the new STEM skill set by BP and its peers? So with the big data first.
Yeah, so big data is funny. When I joined the oil and gas industry, you know, 25, 30 years ago, I thought we had big data then because we had massive volumes of data. And obviously that's just increased over the years. And now we have really big data, and now it's called big data, interestingly. So it always gives me a little chuckle. So where are we going with it? I think, you know, data is going to be at the center of many, many industries, and where it's taking us to a place where you can make better, faster, more informed decisions. And I think, you know, that quite frankly, I think actually even within the energy industry, we're just beginning to touch the edges of it. I know there's a lot being done. I know certainly we are trying to leverage big data across the whole chain, and there is lots of activity. But I think in 5 years we'll look back and say, oh gosh, we were only just starting then. There's so much more that you can do. And maybe in 5 to 10 years it just is, right? Maybe that just is part of how you do business. It is just part of the energy industry. You don't think of it as something separate, and that would be amazing actually, because that would truly mean that at that point it's almost like the oxygen in the air. We're just using it as a way for the company and the industry to breathe, to exist. It just is there. In terms of attracting talent, and specifically STEM talent, I think it's not just the fact that we are embracing technology and the frontiers of technology, very specifically where I work. You know, I love taking what we're doing out to schools and to universities, to students, and to different environments, and saying, hey, do you know that this is the kind of technology, this is the kind of cool things that we do with a purpose. And they're just amazed. They're like, wow, I had no idea that something that's seen as somewhat a traditional industry would be using such interesting things. I think maybe it's been seen as a bit more of a, well, I guess a traditional industry, and so it has been hugely inspiring just to let people see even just a tiny bit of how we use that technology. And I think it is a huge attractor, and it's a huge attractor around the world, because one of the things that I think is really crucial is that you really want, what we want to do and what we need to do and what our industry needs to do going forward is really embrace the diversity of talent that is available across the world, and being able to inspire and attract people through a different lens by connecting them to technology or how we use it, or I think it's just so important. And so it's not just enough, you know, to go and talk about it, but it is actually great that you can actually give great examples of whether it be that we see this technology as a way to create a completely different future through an investment, and our investment in Beyond Limits would be a great example of taking something that's used on Mars and saying, how can we take technology that's used on Mars and apply that in the energy industry? And that's a hugely inspiring story. Or whether it be giving a demonstration of how we're using robotics to you know, go around some of our plants or refineries. I just think it's hugely important, and I think it is really having people take a different look at what we do. And we just hired 2 people from one from Uber and one from Tesla, who, you know, came into our organization because they saw the possibilities of what they could do, despite being at what in the technology industry you would say were kind of the frontier companies, or some of the frontier companies. That's amazing that we've been able to do that, and enormously privileged that they chose to come and work for BP.
The tussle is really on. Tussle is really on between the energy corridor in Houston and the Silicon Valley in San Jose and San Francisco.
I don't know, call it a tussle. I think I would say there's a growing recognition of the amazing things and the huge challenge. I mean, what bigger challenge is there than in the energy industry? And what amazing opportunity for people to come and work on one of the planet's greatest problems. I mean, that amazes me every morning when I get up. I'm like, I am so privileged, and it's so exciting to be working on helping solve one of the planet's biggest problems. I can't think of a bigger attractor.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been an excellent conversation. That was Morag Watson, who is the SVP of Digital Science and Engineering, Oil Gas Giant BP. For more of these conversations, please visit adipec.com. Thank you for watching and listening.